Oh, good afternoon. I'm Mary Klonowski. My husband and I have been members here since sometime in the 1990s, and we had come from the Community of Christ the Servant Lutheran Church, and when that was no longer active, we scouted around in LaGrange for a church that we would be comfortable with, but we found that we really needed a church that had a more formal liturgy. So that's what attracted us to go back to Lutheranism.
My name is Aimee, and my family and I have been going here for about 5 years. And we chose to move churches and come here just because we learned so much about the service and the connections that they did here and in the youth programs that they have here, and we were really excited about how we could be good members here.
Yeah. And Pastor Ben asked me about my involvement. Right now, I'm not very involved at all because of the pandemic and other medical issues. But as a member of Grace for 8 years, I taught Sunday school. And for another 4 or 5 years, I taught in the Wednesday program, which was a lot of fun because we did projects and let the kids be creative about what we were studying. And I really enjoyed that. I serve as a member of the refugee ministry, and I've been involved with the BEDS program as a volunteer. I know there's other stuff, but I can't remember offhand.
What I mostly do is just a lot of the youth stuff, so preschool and the Genesis youth group and the mission trip, things like that. Whenever I can get involved in that kind of stuff, I go to those.
Yeah, great. Well, that's such a great resume, Aimee.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are your questions?
My first question is, within your family, were racial issues in LaGrange, Chicago, or the country discussed ever? And do you think your family's faith or church background played a part?
My dad was negative about race, but my mom worked with African American women, and she couldn't understand what the controversy was. She just said, they're just hardworking people like we are, and I'm really grateful for that. I grew up in the city of Chicago in an immigrant community, and there were 9 different ethnic churches within walking distance from my home. There were Hispanic churches whose liturgies were primarily in Spanish, but there were Polish churches, German churches, etc. So you were kind of confined to your neighborhood. People who were Lithuanian would be good neighbors, but their social life was in their church where they got services because most of them didn't speak English, and they needed services to learn how to get around. Most of them had their own ethnic newspaper. And so what I did was try to connect with other people, but as kids we were connected, but not with the adults. And the area was very poor.
Did that change your outlook on racial issues? Did the way you grew up just kind of change?
There were no they were ethnic issues, not racial issues. And yeah, there's some Polish people who wouldn't talk to the Lithuanian people, etc. But there were no African Americans living even remotely near us. And it was a time when we didn't have cars. You did everything either walking or by bus. And so we didn't have opportunities.
What kind of changed that? Like, what time in your life did that change? Like, when did you find out more about race and things like that?
When I was in high school, I went to a Catholic high school. I became really interested in a group called the Chicago Interfaith Catholic Action. And I would go to their monthly meetings, which were downtown, and finally, there were people from all over Chicago, and I felt I was so grateful to be able to make friends that were different than just my neighborhood friends.
That's awesome. So you just kind of got connected with everybody more than, or you got out of your like bubble of where you were. That's awesome.
Absolutely, but also in college, I went to DePaul University in the city, and it's a Catholic school. When I was a sophomore, we realized that the frats and sororities had exclusionary clauses specifically for race.
Yeah.
And we thought, oh my God, this is a Christian school. So a number of us got together and we went to the administration and said, did you know that this was happening in a Christian school? Of course, we made that point. And they didn't know it was happening, but they acted immediately. They've informed all the frats and sororities, unless they changed that policy, that they were no longer affiliated with DePaul University. So I was really proud of the administration for doing it so quickly.
That's amazing.
And we had African American friends at DePaul. My husband and I both graduated from DePaul. So we went to a wedding of an African American couple. There were very few white folks there, but we had a lot of fun. And then when we were married, after we were graduated, we invited them to our wedding, and they did not feel comfortable coming, which made us very, very sad, but I think they were right, and that's really bad. And then when my husband went to grad school to University of Michigan, we really had a diversity of friends. And we settled in Oak Lawn after he got a job in the Chicago area. And one of our friends, Elmer Dupre, I can't believe I remember his name. He called us and he said he was having an interview in Chicago. Could we get together? And we said, oh, why don't you just stay with us? And then we said, but you've got to know we live in Oak Lawn and there is such hostility to black people moving into the neighborhood. And would you feel safe here? And he said, yeah, I'll have a rented car. I'll go out early, and as soon as I come back, I'll just get into the house really fast. And I'm sure it was because he and his wife, Winnie, were really scraping for money, so he decided it was worth the risk.
How do you think that kind of relationship like affected how you looked at race and thought about race and things like that, or the racial issues in the area?
Well, we didn't join Grace until the 1990s, but I'm really active with the League of Women Voters, and my husband and I were members of the NAACP before it became extinct. And that was really important because what it did was we made close friends with the folks from the black community in LaGrange. I don't know if you know, LaGrange is a very segregated town. And there were two huge issues. This was between 1965 and 70, I don't remember the exact year, but one was on fair housing. whether LaGrange should adopt the ordinance. And we got together with the NAACP and the LaGrange Area League of Women Voters and said, they're going to have a public hearing. We all have to testify. And we did. And the ordinance was successfully passed, not necessarily because of us, but the only church in this whole area that testified was the Unitarian Universalist Church in Hinsdale. I was shocked by that. I thought, don't they see this as a follower of Christ? Yeah. And the other issue was, as members of the NAACP, we learned about issues as well as made friends. And one of the issues was the fact that the Black community felt that when they had issues to discuss with the school board, both the elementary school board and the high school board, they were welcome to talk, but they didn't feel that they were taken seriously, and they thought that they were kind of dismissed. So my husband, Bob, and Ellen Bates, she was legendary, a legendary activist in the Black community, they formed a plan where we have this delegate assembly, which consists of people who are citizens, but mostly parents of the school children. They gather together when there's a school board election, and they interview and endorse candidates. So Bob and Ellen decided they were going to take over, and they did. He was the chair, and she was the secretary, and the rest of us had the job of finding delegates to the delegate assembly to who were at least open to the idea that there should be minority representation because their problems might be different. And Bob and Ellen, who was just a magnificent persuader, they sponsored a bunch of coffees and did other things. And for the first time, we had an African-American elected, Mr. Bernie Sims.
That's awesome. Do you think like the way that you approached it, like kind of helped make people feel more welcome, and that of different races do you think that they felt more welcome because of the things that you did there?
Well, they certainly felt welcome in LaGrange because they have it's a pretty close community. And when we were members of the NAACP, a lot of their social life centered around the Second Baptist Church. You notice that? That always was a point that was a kind of a disturbing point in my life, that they were the Second Baptist Church. But so people there loved being a part of that because that was their social life.
How do you think that like Grace as a community kind of how do you think that Grace has made people of different races and culture feel about race, not necessarily now, but back in, I know you weren't a part of Grace in the 70s, but in like when you first were welcome to Grace, how do you think people...
I can't remember if the race issue was on anybody's radar screen. And so it's not fair for me to address that right here. But we have this community diversity group in LaGrange, and I went to some of their meetings, but then as president of our local League of Women Voters, I delegated somebody to be on their board and share information with us. They've sponsored some really neat programs, especially their movie series on issues of diversity. So it's not only African Americans, but the LGBTQ community, et cetera. And I went to the pastor at that time, who I will not name, and I said, they're having this big movie series. And many of the churches in LaGrange have signed on as co-sponsors. So we would like you to have the council sign on as co-sponsors. They wouldn't even consider that. They said we get so many of these requests, Boy Scout spaghetti dinners and stuff. But, I thought
important.
this was, this was an important social issue of justice. And so I felt like, I guess I was missing the point and stuff. But since then, Grace has signed on as a co-sponsor, and I'm really delighted with that.
Is there any other ways you think Grace has changed in like welcoming different races and cultures since you've joined? Like, I know you said that they weren't pushing as much like diversity and things like that back then, but do you think it has changed now?
Oh, I think there have been great changes. I think that our vote to not only welcome LGBTQ people, but to actually allow somebody in a same-sex relationship to be ordained in our church and to have weddings in our church speaks volumes about how things have changed. And I think the community has responded greatly to the refugee ministry, which, of course, because of the pandemic, we were not allowed to pursue these last couple of years. But they've been just so generous and eager to help in whatever ways they can. So I think I've noticed a change from that point of view in attitudes, but we've not been successful in recruiting African American or Hispanic members into our community. But I think, or I should say I suspect, the issue is if you want to have members, well, think about the African American community. They live, and by choice, by the way, now, because we did have the Fair Housing Ordinance, by choice, they prefer to live together. There are many families in LaGrange where generations of the same family have lived. And they really enjoy their social life. So the thing to do is, if the community diversity group is sponsoring something, to do something to become aware of it. So my suggestion was that perhaps the council can find somebody who would attend their monthly board meetings to keep us all informed.
Yeah, do you think that there could be other ways that we could introduce things like that into the way that we run our worship services and even just like our programs that we offer here at Grace, like whether it be like the Wednesday meetings, things like that, where they have people can sit and talk about race or about different ways to get out into the community.
Well, I think the book discussion groups are very valuable, and we learn from one another, but my book discussion groups didn't have any minorities in the discussion. But that's okay. One year, we actually invited the woman who is the minister to the Hispanic community at St. Cletus. And she came and gave a talk on Sunday morning. I thought she was so good, I thought that it would have been really nice to have her preach. But that wasn't in the cards. And we were just glad to be able to present the program.
Yeah. I'm glad I got to talk to you about some of these things. Is there anything else?
Yeah, if you don't mind, it's not in the questions, but I would like to address the issue of how my faith kind of resulted in a calling to this. And very specifically, I read a book by a theologian, and he referred to various biblical passages to say that compassion without justice meets the needs of individuals, but it doesn't meet the needs of systemic racism. I think at Grace we do a great job with compassion. And there have been outreach programs to help with the after-school program in the Black community. And then I picked out a quote from the Gospels. It's in Luke 11, I believe. Jesus says, "Woe to you, Pharisees, you neglect justice." And so I think we are called to not only do that, but to address the issues of justice. And you young people know about that. You've studied Martin Luther King and the oppression that Black people experienced in the South at that time and continue to experience now. I highly recommend, let me back up. The Southern Baptist Conference, of which he was a minister, and enabled him to contact Black churches to organize to overcome the oppression and to get civil rights. But he wasn't having a lot of luck with the white churches. So I recommend you, maybe even in a teenage session, if you're going to be studying this, read his letter from the Birmingham jail. And it was, I think it was that letter, and I can't remember when exactly it was written, but in that letter, he encouraged the white churches to get involved, and he used theology and religion to do it. And it wasn't too long after that you would see the civil rights demonstration, or my husband and I would participate in them in the Chicago area, and you began to see more and more people with the clerical collar and bishops coming out. And that was just a necessary component to be successful in adopting civil rights.
If you have a minute, what advice would you give to someone like Aimee, who is soon to be a leader within our congregation, and her and many like her are going to be directing kind of the direction of Grace in the future? Do you have any advice for them?
Well, the first thing I would say is the cast book recommendation. When you're in school, see if you're comfortable enough, see if there are ways that you and your friends can sit at the lunch table with our African American students and get to know them and get to know what their issues are. As a teacher at LT, this really stayed with me, and this was decades ago. I had a young African American girl in her freshman year in algebra, and she was just an outstanding B student. And then I had her in her junior year, and she just was not doing well. And I thought, well, maybe she's not feeling good, maybe there are personal problems in the family. But after a while, I thought, this can't be true because she's so talented. And I asked her what was happening. And she said to me that she was under pressure from the other teenagers at school that were African American, because looking like you're smart means that you're not really part of their group, of the African American group. And that just saddened me so much. But then as she continued to talk, I got to know about the resentments of these other kids and stuff. And I thought, this is probably an outgrowth of that. And so we worked, well, I should say I worked, because she was too afraid, I worked with her mother and told her mother what was going on. And her mother said, "I'll handle it." And I think she meant, beyond talking to Katrina, I think she meant that she was going to sound the alarm in the African American community that,
Talking to
you know, is this, do you know that this is going on? And so having a good relationship with Katrina on an individual basis helped me to learn about that. And I don't know, maybe some kids would not be comfortable not staying with their clique at the lunch table, and I remember that from my high school years too, and stuff, but it could be a calling.
Currently, I've been sitting with, I have a Hispanic friend named Janessa, but she had me sit with her friends at lunch, so I've been sitting with her and her friends.
Have you found that valuable?
Yeah, in fact, it's been interesting to learn about their culture at home and how they, like how their culture reflects onto their school and how they interact with people at school. It's been interesting. And then also there's like the clubs. They have different clubs about, like they have NHI and Latinos Juntos and different, like for each like culture group they had. I know they have like an Arabic club and a like German club, things like that. They have different clubs to learn about different cultures, which is
Yeah.
very.
So do they have an African American club?
I'm not sure, but
You might
I could look into
talk to
it.
your friend
Yeah.
about maybe
Yeah.
starting one, and make sure somebody like you that is committed to this and some of your friends would join that club, because that's where you learn a lot
Yeah.
and stuff. I have another LT story, and you can edit it out, but the kids, well, I don't know if it was the coaches or something, they really tried to recruit the many more African-American kids to do cheerleading or the pom-poms.
Yeah.
And were not successful. And does anybody have any ideas? And then one year, we got this great young African-American woman teaching math, so I got to know her really well. And she said she graduated from University of Wisconsin in Madison. And we talked to her about this issue, and she said, "Oh, it's not part of what we value." She said, "I'll take over and form a step dancing club."
Yeah, they still have.
And have you seen them? Have they
Yeah,
performed?
They're awesome. I
Yeah,
didn't see them
well,
once.
they're really awesome,
Yeah.
I think. And I don't know if she's still doing it, Mrs.
Yeah.
Killens.
Oh, I don't know
If
she's
she's
the
still
coach, but they still have it going on. They still,
Yeah. And the kids came out in droves for that. And you even had white kids come out for it because they really thought it was cool.
Yeah. They have it at the all-school assembly every year, so they always have a performance, and they always lead the different grade levels through part of their steppers dance, which is awesome.
And how are they received?
Everyone always gets super into it, so it makes me happy to see that.
Yeah. So I told Pastor Ben I could make this 2 hours as
Yeah.
I think of all these stories and
Yeah,
stuff.
there's
But how
awesome
are we?
things.
Are we past 20 minutes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
we're 37.
Oh,
Okay, but so you can,
Oh, I've got plenty.
Oh.
Got plenty.
yeah, so, and to make 20 minutes?
Oh, yeah. You
Okay,
got it. You got
we done good, kid.
it. You nailed it.
Fist bump. High five.
that was great talking to you.
Well,
It's
thank you
interesting.
for
It's always
taking the
interesting.
leadership on this. That's huge. That's huge. I'm sure it's a lot of work, too.
It's not that. I'm just coming here to talk.
Yeah. Another story I have is that when the Head Start program was applied for in the LaGrange area, we had to testify in favor of it and get the community support, which was easy to do. The community was great about it. But the federal legislation required that all the leadership, the presidents or co-presidents, and more than half, or I guess exactly a half or more of the Head Start board had to be parents of the children involved. And part of their job was to sponsor fundraisers, and so the other part of the board would be, would be people from local communities and churches and stuff. And so I was on the board with the League of Women Voters, and I was teaching at LT at the time. So for our monthly meetings, I contacted, they had at that time Girls Club, I don't know if they still have it. And I said, well, here's a project. If you would send 3 or 4 girls once a month, they don't have to be the same girls, to Congress Park School on the night of the meetings, because these folks can't afford a sitter. And so we did that every month. And I have to say, the girls loved it because the kids were so great.
Yeah.
They were in the gym, so some of them were playing basketball and some were little. But the girls got a lot out of it. They got really bonded with the kids, I guess is a good word. And so they would sponsor big birthday parties or holiday parties. And they even on their own did a Secret Santa because they got so fond of the kids.
That's amazing.
You never know how things would work out, and what you have to do is find out how the Lord is calling you.
Yeah, just opportunities you get.
Yeah,
Go out.
take advantage of them, recognize them, but take action. Just talking about it or supplying immediate needs is one thing, but the Lord calls us to act for justice. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Mary. Thank you, Aimee.
Well, thank
Fantastic.
Aimee for taking this on.
Good.
We're so lucky at Grace.
We've got a lot of good folks